This piece is an expanded form of an article that I wrote last year for unwinnable.com. A link will be provided to that source in the description. There were a lot of days where if you asked me how I was doing, I would use some colorful metaphor to describe my struggle. I'd say, it's like I'm super glued to the inside of a heavy cauldron trying to move myself up a mountain with a sledgehammer. I could just say I'm getting over it, but I'm not. Bennett Foddy is not subtle about his intentions for getting over it. I made this game for a certain type of person, starts the Steam page. To hurt them. So much of the discourse around getting over it, though, takes this inflammatory statement as gospel, as the ethos of the game in one sentence. But I don't think this gets to the heart of it. Upon its release in 2017, the B-game homage indie earned its fair share of gamer rage. Streamers suffered through their attempts to climb the mountain, and the falls became fodder for intense reaction. I have to believe that some were played up for views and viewer amusement, but those kind of freakouts have to come from a real place too. A constant presence in his own game, Bennett Foddy became a tormentor, his voice chiming in to rub salt into the wound, to prove that his players could not, in fact, get over it. This was in some ways inevitable. Getting over it has that natural moxie to incite rage within a player. It's fickle, it's difficult to learn, it's got controls that seem far too analog for the precision that the game requires. One tiny twitch in the wrong direction can launch the player character, who is rather impishly named Diogenes in reference to the cynic philosopher who made a game of baiting enragement from his more refined contemporaries. You can get knocked back down towards the depths of the starting area. So much of the public perception of Foddy's work centers around these player responses. QWOP and GURP garnered a similar form of perplexed frustration, but the progress in those games were so arbitrary, high score based, that each turn became its own experience rather than a snowballed force of frustration and anxiety. It's really easy to categorize his work into the genre of rage game. And I think there's a part of him that wants us to do that, especially with the sadistic lilt of the sale page. But I also think, however, that that's kind of a bollocks thing to do, to take a work of art so blatantly contemplative at face value. If Getting Over It isn't a rage game, though, despite all of the rage it incited when it hit streamers, you might ask, what is it? So let me explain my categorization. It's a matter of intuitivity. Is that a word? Our relationship with interactive media, by and large, is governed by an intrinsic social contract. Games have rules that are mostly standardized. Things like pits and spikes or obvious hazards. Gravity pulls us down rather than any other direction. Enemies move in predictable patterns, or at least nowadays they follow certain rule sets that allow a player to respond in turn. You're not supposed to get punched in the back of the head by an invisible enemy with no telegraphing. These things are true in almost every game, in the same way that we expect a book to have a start and a finish, and to write in the same language the whole damn time. When you don't have that, you get Finnegan's Wake, and the average Joe is not going to sit down and want to engage with that. It's a specific and esoteric market, for sure. We expect a game to properly telegraph its hazards, to have a cogent internal logic that lets us anticipate coming challenges, and to have obstacles that can be avoided with reflexes or proper foresight. Rage games exist in a space that counters these notions of safe zones versus unsafe zones. In I Want to Be the Guy, for example, instant death apples fall upwards, defying gravity just to screw with you. A pillar falls from off-screen onto the only safe ground. In a sense, these are almost puzzle games. Rage aside, the player has to uncover the counterintuitive actions that allow them to progress to the next screen. A game like Default Dan is probably the best explication of this. The spikes are bouncy, pits teleport you to the top of the screen, power-ups and coins are instant death sentences. By and large, it's a pretty basic platformer, but the challenge comes from inverting this social contract. Yes is no, up is down, and we have to set aside our intuition and internal logic and replace it with that of this specific game. If we're going to make a comparison to Fadi's work, Rage games are closest to QWOP than anything else. It's built on singular moments of befuddlement and anger, and then they allow the player to move on to the next practical joke. I Want to Be the Guy and Cat Mario and their ilk are intended to be played through with checkpoints. Even if a life system threatens to send the player back and lose progress, it's not a pervasive thing. But in getting over it, the fear of being sent backwards or downwards is pervasive and compounding. Every iota of progress that we gain becomes just another thing that we can lose. The game autosaves so that mistakes are tangible and permanent. We roll back to the very bottom of the mountain. Mostly. The map sort of snakes back and forth so that a number of falls are only a slight loss of progress. Right, once you get past the cathedral, it's a bit hard to get knocked back down beyond Orange Hell, unless you get really Boulder Dash with your movement. The fear of lost progress, though, is just present enough, and the occurrence of total failure is just occasional enough that it's never able to leave your mind. This rage, for lack of a better word, is not born of the game's lack of intuitiveness. It's born of the player's understanding that there are defined and logical rules existing in conflict with the inability to achieve those goals. When you move the mouse, the hammer moves, and pulls Diogenes according to the game's reasonably cohesive physics. The faults instead lie in the player's imprecision, and the difficulty of climbing cliffs that may be too steep or too sheer. If the hammer is on a steep cliff without traction, it's gonna fall. That's logical. But maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe just a bit. To make getting over it fair by the standards of making it eminently winnable would be to do something like lighting the hammer differently to show where traction lies. It would be to eliminate the difficulty. Bennett Foddy acknowledges this at the start of the game when he's discussing sexy hiking as the inspiration. To neuter the game's difficulty would be to render it meaningless. Our rage or frustration is intentional, but it's not alone. It comes shrouded in other more complex emotions. Despair, anxiety, dread, doubt. When we're climbing, we're not just getting over the mountain. We're trying to get over all of these feelings too. I think it matters that the game is presented in this sort of shoddy, slipshod way, right? That our protagonist is somehow sealed within this iron cauldron. He's only capable of moving himself with the hammer. There's a comic element to it, and it renders a lot of this rage kinda nonsensical, kinda arbitrary. Trying to explain why this game, out of all of them out there, is so effective at cajoling these feelings kinda sounds utterly nonsensical, to use a different word. It sounds absurd. One's first, and likely first dozen, should they be insane enough to keep going, ascent is all very Sisyphean. The task is made endless by its own absurdity. Our response to it prolongs the sense of hurt, and Foddy doesn't really help us cushion that blow. I think in an alternate universe, The game would almost be easier if his voice was mocking us. But it doesn't. He understands. He explains. He congratulates us on our success. He forgives us. Fadi exists in this game as the Virgil to our Dante, offering passive guidance and feedback for our ascent out of hell. The orange one and all the rest. His presence plays no part in our failure, and that makes it worse. In throwing myself back into the game in preparation for this, I couldn't make Fadi into my enemy as so many players had when the game was first coming out. He hadn't forced me at gunpoint to climb the mountain of assets and assorted things. My wrists weren't cuffed to the desk. I could close the game, I could delete it, I could walk away. To do so, though, would hurt me far more than Mr. Fadi ever could. I was the real sadist when it came to getting over it, because to begin the task of climbing was to promise myself that I could reach the summit. In some ways, the pain of falling is death by 1,000 cuts. Each split second of stomach-sinking panic as my hammer failed to move in the way I wanted, or more accurately, I failed to move the mouse in a way I thought it should, was followed by this crushing dread in the back of my throat. And sometimes I'd make a situation worse by flailing the hammer around, and I'd knock myself from a slightly lower platform back into the depths of hell, right next to that tree. But the more that I played, struggled, suffered, endured, the more the pain became a part of the experience. I stopped fearing it. I started to get over it. Our relationship with games is as much about self-fulfillment as it is entertainment. We see ourselves as the characters we inhabit for a short period of time. Their desires and goals become ours. However unbelievable, mundane, chaotic, whatever, the thing that stands between these collections of pixels or polygons and their wildest dreams becomes our ability to make it happen. Edmund Hillary said we climb Everest because it's there, and I think that's true in the real world or simulated behind a screen. When I first wrote the article that I'm now adapting into this video, I hadn't reached the summit of the mountain. I was recording footage for B-roll, I guess, and somehow I managed to overcome it while recording. Before that, I'd made it a tradition to pick up getting over it every few months, struggle with it for an hour or two, and then walk away a little bit sore, a little bit scuffed, but feeling like I'd had a good go of it. Every time brought me a little bit further up the mountain. And that had to be enough. Bennett Foddy says that he made getting over it to hurt a specific type of person. And I think the people he's talking about are the people that take it at face value as a sadistic challenge, who don't persevere out of the desire to complete the climb, but to avoid the shame that comes with admitting that it's not always immediately possible. And he's open about this challenge, this moment of all-consuming doubt that encourages us to surrender out of a desire to protect our own egos. The absurdity doesn't come from the challenge, I think. The situation is absurd, but it's philosophically maddening to us when we face the notion that failure is entirely attributable to us. What's absurd is that we keep trying, knowing that the most likely outcome is a renewal of our frustration. What's absurd is that we still find a way to do it. Bennett Foddy's narration is never sadistic. He never laughs at our falls, never mocks a failed jump or that panic response that makes it all worse. He just offers us reassurance and continues to talk to the player about their progress or his thoughts on what games owe us as art. He plays Great Depression-era music about pushing through the hard times, and and shows us that our feelings of frustration and listlessness aren't unique to us or the microcosm of getting over it. If you've ever taken an intro to philosophy course, or anything more, you've probably latched on to my repetition of the word absurd. And I'm calling back to the philosopher Albert Camus, who uses the myth of Sisyphus to explore the persistent dread of the human condition. He insists that existence itself is absurd. Our lack of defined innate purpose is maddening. Part of living life to the fullest is accepting that absurdity and finding ways to laugh at our great cosmic joke. Finding things to do that invoke our lust for life just for the hell of it. Getting over it is a quest to find the humor in our failures, to laugh when we flub a jump and are sent hurtling down to the abyss instead of freaking out and throwing a chair. Our obdurate mission to taste defeat is tempered by our ravenous hunger for a victory that is truly ours, and not one given to us out of pity. Failure is but a stepping stone towards inevitable progression, however slow. Pushing one's capacity for failure is part of this grand quest to find fulfillment in the things that we do. It doesn't have to hurt us beyond measure. I now depart from the script that I've adapted now to briefly connect it to my fear of producing work like this. I've suffered a great deal of dysphoria around my voice, a great deal of uncertainty about the impact my words can have. I often feel that my own work is absurd and meaningless to everyone except for myself. I'm creating this video first of the backlog of essays and scripts that I've written, not only because it's here and I've recently been playing Getting Over It again, but because I think it connects broader to my own difficulty putting myself out there and being vulnerable. I've known for a long time that I can do this, that I can produce video essays like the people that I've watched for years and the people that have inspired me to think and engage and to be openly passionate about art. The only thing that stopped me is myself and my fear of falling, my fear of some effort or time investment being meaningless. And the editing in this video is probably not going to be perfect. It's not going to be great, and that's okay. I have to be okay with that. I have to make incremental progress, because the only way I can reach the summit is to keep climbing.